because, I mean, Bree and I, we both have kids who either recently, well, still going through it. I mean, Bree has a 16-year-old.
I have a 17 and almost 16-year-old. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have an 11 and a 15-year-old. And it's just it was such an awkward time for us. Seeing our kids go through it. It's so awkward to like coach them, particularly boys, which I want to get into a little bit more. Just, us being women and not knowing what to say.
That's been a real fun one, being like when it was just me with my two kids, post-divorce, and my son going through puberty. And he's like, Mom, I'm not going to say what, but this body part hurts. And I'm like, yeah, I don't have that body part. You want to call your dad? I do. So yeah.
So like the first thing I want to know is because like how did you guys start working with each other?
Yeah. Oh, it's such a meet cute. I mean, it really is a meet cute. So I was running puberty workshops in New York and LA, and Cara's based in LA, and she wrote the epically cultish Karen Keeping of You books.
We had a minor fangirl when we found that out, Cara.
It's a big deal. So when a mutual friend said to me, I want to introduce you to my friend Cara Natterson, she wrote the Karen Keeping of You books, I literally said, no, I can't meet her. Like, she's puberty royalty. I'm not worthy. That's exactly what I said. And our friend was like, no, she's so nice. I promise. So we met a couple of times. The second time we met, literally the second time we'd ever laid eyes on each other, she looked at me and she said, I'm going to tell you exactly what to do with your life. Like, literally.
You guys, that's my thing.
That's her thing.
Oh my gosh.
She's very good with directives.
I do not hold back from a list.
I was like, okay. And she said, you're going to do a podcast about puberty. And I said, okay, but you have to do it with me. And she said, okay. And that was how we started working together. So we built this puberty portal on our Umla site. So our products, we sell bras and shorts and socks, all to solve the pain points of puberty. But we have tons of information for tweens and teens on that site. And then we started the podcast. We were like, oh, this is really fun. We love working together. And then we wrote a book together. This is so awkward. And then we launched a health and sex ed curriculum called That Health Class. And then we launched a membership called Less Awkward. And like this one meeting where I said, I'm not worthy, don't introduce me. Anyone listening who's like, I'm not worthy to meet people, you could end up meeting your partner. Like, never say no to a meeting because you never know.
That is so true. I love that story. And Cara, if you have like any insights into anything like in my life, like please let us know during this interview.
If you want to look into that crystal ball and give us life advice, we are open to that energy.
I just want to point out how hilarious it is that in the story, I play the character who is the talker and who's directive. And yet I just want us to think about that.
I should add that no one had ever in my life told me what to do up until that point. It was the first time anyone had said to me, I'm going to tell you what to do, because I was normally the one in the other seat. And I was like, oh, I should listen because this never happens.
Part of it is Vanessa and I are both thirdborns.
Of four.
And I am a deep believer in birth order. It's a very interesting phenomenon that plays out in pediatricians' offices. I ask any pediatrician and they will tell you birth order really makes a difference. So thirdborns classically do not love conflict. They're like the people who bring everyone together, right? And
that's Bree, by the way. Yes.
Right?
And I'm going to tell you that I totally so strongly believe in it too. Like that was one of my undergrad psych studies I did was about
it's
birth
huge.
Order. And I totally believe it. I'm like, yep.
It is the real deal. So here are two thirdborns trying to solve one life path. It was a great lunch. Of course we're going to work together. I mean,
of course.
But yes, I'm happy. By the end of this conversation, I will look into your crystal balls and give you all life advice.
I can't wait. I can't
Not
wait,
only will we tell you how to survive the puberty and adolescence years, but Cara will tell you what your future holds.
Oh,
She's the
well,
magic 8-ball of puberty experts.
I love it.
I am excited. I'm excited. So let's dig in to this talk about puberty, because I know through previous interviews that we have done with experts ranging from, I know you know Dr. Lisa D'Amour,
Love her.
Dr. Cheryl Ziegler. There is a lot of talk about puberty starting earlier and earlier and earlier. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and how has puberty changed from when we were kids and going through it to what our kids are going through right now?
Yeah. So this is the part of the conversation where there's usually an audible gasp, because puberty looks nothing like it looked when we all went through it. So
Agreed.
it starts on average 2 to 3 years sooner than it did. The average age for a girl to go through puberty in this country, and frankly, we're not an outlier. Okay. This is global phenomenon, puberty happening earlier, but girls on average are between 8 and 9. Boys on average are between 9 and 10 when they enter puberty. What do we mean by enter puberty? We mean they show the physical or emotional signs of circulating sex hormones. Physically, those look like breast buds on girls, those breast buds that poke out of absolutely everything. Vanessa likes to say you could be wearing a down coat and those breast buds are poking out. In boys, it's penile and testicular growth, which we can get into because this is not as noticeable, right? In all kids, probably the earliest sign of puberty, I attribute this quote to Louise Greenspan, who is an amazing endocrinologist and researcher. The first sign of puberty is generally a slamming door. So when you start seeing mood swings in your tween, they are probably trying to manage the sex hormones that are coursing through their body and through their brains and changing the way they feel. And here's something else that's different about puberty. It starts earlier and it lasts much longer, like 2 to 3 times longer. It is stretching like taffy. So when we went through it, was like a 3 to 4 year sprint, and now it's a decade.
And why? Do they have anything as to why?
So Louise, who we adore, she wrote a book called The New Puberty about 10 years ago, but it's still probably one of the best resources out there. She and other researchers are looking to identify the cause. No one knows.
Yeah.
No one knows. What it's going to boil down to is that there are going to be some common denominator chemicals that we generally refer to as endocrine disruptors. These are chemicals that mess with the way your hormones, that's endocrine hormone, mess with the way your hormones work in your body. There are going to be some endocrine disruptors that are identified that are in everything we eat and drink and breathe and put into and onto our bodies and all that. And that's going to be one big driver. We do know also, and Vanessa is very passionate about this point, so I'll pass the baton, that chronic stress is a very clear driver of earlier puberty. And Vanessa, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard thing to lay on people because everyone is so stressed out, kids and adults. But we do know that elevated levels of cortisol in the body, which is the physical manifestation of chronic stress, those hormones can actually tip into the sex hormones that get puberty up and running. So kids living under chronic stress, kids who experience adverse childhood experiences like trauma and abuse and food and housing insecurity, who live closer to crime, who live in poverty, those kids are at risk for earlier puberty, partially because of the chemical reality in their bodies of elevated levels of cortisol. We also know that for all of us, living under chronic stress over sustained periods of time isn't good for anyone, no matter their age, no matter their stage of puberty. And then there's the whole kind of high achieving culture risk and the chronic stress that kids under tremendous athletic, academic, pressure. And I don't know if you guys have had Jenny Wallace on the podcast, but
I want
wrote a book.
her.
So
She's
we'll
amazing.
Book.
Yeah, we'll connect you to her. She's great. And she looks, we're here. We're full service. We're full service, Joanne.
Love it.
she looks at all of the data and research that's been done out there about the chronic stress related to high achieving. And then layer on top of it, we live in a world with climate change. We have a totally bananas presidential election that
Oh my
we're
God.
in the run up to.
Start
There's
crying.
just like
I'm having
global
stress
uncertainty.
dreams.
Yes.
Every day, stress dreams. And I
Yes.
can guarantee you the election is part of it.
It is. I mean, I've never read so much escapist literature as I have over the last 6 months, and it's only going to get worse.
She's trying to save herself from going back into puberty.
I know. I'm managing my managing.
It'd be the next thing, right? Like there's going to be a second wave. Well, wait a minute. That's perimenopause and menopause, which is
Yes.
a whole other episode.
Yes.
It's funny because like I read escapist literature at night, but my escapist literature is thrillers. So real life actually doesn't look so bad compared
You're
to the
like, oh,
escapist.
Maybe that's
strategy.
a route to take. Maybe we should consider that.
You're like,
Nobody's
oh,
killing anybody. No one's like kidnapping. No one's like.
No one's going to
no
be
one
in the trunk of a
can't
car.
remember. Right. No one can't remember if they did kill someone or if they were just too drunk to remember if they killed
Oh my
someone.
gosh.
Yes.
Have you've read The Girl on the Train, I'm guessing?
Yes.
yes.
And
That's
I have a
the
new
theme.
one that I lent my husband because I was like, you got to read something escapist. And I gave him a thriller, actually, that Emily Oster recommended in her newsletter called The Winner.
Oh, I haven't heard of this one.
Yeah. Well, I'll book review it for you, Joanne, and then I'll let you know if it's worth it.
Please. The full
Yes.
service coming. And I interrupted you actually, so we didn't get to actually say what Jennifer Wallace's book was, and it was Never Enough.
Oh, Jenny's book is Never Enough. It came out almost exactly a year ago, and it looks at this high achievement culture and the impact on kids. And she cites lots and lots of excellent research and data done by researchers around the country. So it's definitely a good read.
Yeah, I want to get a little bit into those causes of puberty, the high achievement, the climate change, the worry, the stress right after this. Although talking about high achievement is like one of my favorite things because I think it's such a issue today in today's culture. My daughter goes to a high achieving high school, and I am constantly fighting messages of high achievement about like what you need to do to get into college, what classes you need to take to get into college. There's a huge like push, and I'm sure that other schools are doing this to kids too, about this thing called like an AP medallion, or I'm not sure exactly what it is, but they're taking like these really stressful courses just to get this little seal on their diploma, which I see as meaning absolutely nothing whatsoever.
I can't even
like,
tell you
taking
where
all
my
the
high school
fun
diploma is.
out of their lives. Yeah. Exactly. So like, since we know high achievement is an issue, and these other stress things are an issue, is there anything that parents can do to kind of soften the blows at home so that they won't affect our kids so much and won't like cause these huge impacts to their process?
So I have a couple of things to say that are going to sound very unrelated, but I promise I will tie them together. So one is Vanessa and I did a book tour in the fall and winter when our book, This Is So Awkward, came out, and we spoke in front of 55 schools. And one of the things that I was most surprised by, I had never heard schools self-identify as high achieving. In my life, I'd never heard that phrase. And we heard it a number of times on the book tour. And I think, so I want to hold that thought in one hand, right? Just the branding of education and what these kids are exposed to in terms of how schools are branding and marketing themselves. I think this is an important piece to hold. Okay, now I want to hold in another hand. Good thing I only have two hands because I'm only going to do two things. I want to talk for a second about Jonathan Haidt's book. I was with a group of pediatricians the other night, a group of pediatricians and Vanessa, who is an honorary pediatrician at this point. And we were talking about Jonathan Haidt's book. And one of the pediatricians said, "It's so funny. I saw the title." I said, I wondered if he was talking about the wrong generation, that the real anxious generation were the parents. And this other pediatrician said, "That is so funny. I saw the title of his book and I thought, finally, someone wrote a book about the anxiety that parents carry and how it is translating into this thing that is really weighing down their kids." So I now want to bring those two threads together. because the very first thing that we can do as trusted adults for any kid. So you don't have to be a parent. You can be a parent, grandparent, coach, mentor, teacher, healthcare provider. I don't care what your role is. If you love and care about a tween or a teen or a 20-something, and you actually look at your behavior, you look at your language, look at all the things that are influencing you around the world, and then you clock it and you actively engage in conversation with that kid about why those pressures do not translate for you, why you don't care about that AP badge. It's not just that you don't care, which, by the way, hallelujah that you don't care.
I don't
But
care.
it's right. But it's saying to a kid, I just want you to understand, like, I think it's so great that you're working so hard. Here's why I don't care. Let's be in conversation. I want to hear why you care, and I want to share with you why I don't. Why is that important? Because if you come at it from the perspective that I'm not going to validate the crazy thing that you're doing because you're trying to get a good housekeeping seal of approval on your homework, right?
Yes.
Which feels
That's
nuts,
exactly what it is.
right? If you come at it like that, what are they going to do? They just
They're
shut
gonna
down.
fight.
They're going
gonna
to
shut
fight
down.
and shut
Yeah.
down,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And
So if you validate, and Vanessa is queen of validating kids when she speaks to them, like she's the best validator I know. It doesn't mean she agrees with everything, but you validate.
you also
Validate
want to
it.
make sure
Exactly.
they're like taking care of themselves. I mean, part of it is this
Yes.
stress causes kids not
do
to
dumb
take care.
stuff.
So are they getting enough sleep? Are they eating enough and the kinds of foods that are going to nourish their bodies? Are they moving their bodies enough and yet not so much that they're actually at risk of injury or overuse? Like there's, are they showering? Are they washing their hair, right? We think of all the things that fall by the wayside in terms of people taking care of themselves, and the 4 pillars of health. We actually just did a podcast episode about them because sometimes we get so far down the path of like meta high level concepts when talking to kids that we forget about the really basic things they need to do to take care of themselves. And if you put those forward, like, hey, you got to get at least 8 hours of sleep a night, all of a sudden they have to make different choices throughout the day in terms of how they spend their day. And I believe, and this is a process I've been through with my own kids, is sometimes you have to help them take things off their plate. So that may mean having them take fewer APs. That may mean having them play for a different club sports team or move dance companies or join a different drama troupe, whatever it is, because if they cannot feel well, then something needs to change and they need our help sifting through what choices they're making.
They do absolutely need our help. And I know Bree wants to say something along these lines because she has experienced this with her son in particular. Yeah.
Yeah. So like everything you're saying is exactly my son's junior year of high school. Like so being divorced, there is a certain degree of like autonomy I try to make sure that my kids have because again, my ex is very much my ex. We are polar opposites when it comes to parenting. So I try to give them like choices and to let them be more in control of what's going on in their life because obviously some things they can't. Anyways, last year, it was nothing but AP and honors classes. We also have something called 0 hour in our district. I don't know if every district does that. That's where they have a choice to take an extra class before school even starts.
Before school,
that meant,
at like 6:30 in the morning.
Yeah, that meant my son was at school at 6:15 a.m.
Oh
it's
my
now
God.
illegal in California. That actually was a thing, and it's illegal.
I so
Yay for
like
California.
they say Arizona is like mini California. I'll embrace that. Yeah, bring that over. So he had 0 hours, so he'd get to school at like 6:15, and then he had after school band practice and clubs and a job.
Oh my God.
And I was trying so hard to be like, listen, anybody that knew me in the last year, my son was a jerk. He was a jerk all year long, just a jerk. And and you could see it. He was exhausted. Like I found out he was like staying up all night sometimes.
Yeah.
Because like, you don't know that's happening. They shut off their lights. You go to bed, they go to bed. And the next thing you know, you find out later, oh no, he was up to 4 a.m. and then got an hour of sleep and then went on to school again. So it was so hard seeing that happen. And first of all, not having control of his schedule 24/7, because every other week he went to his dad's house and his dad was like, I deal with it my way, leave my way alone. And so I couldn't say like, I'm going to make you quit this, because when he would go to dad's house, that was not the conversation. Right? So all I could do is just be like, think about how your body feels, you know? I'm like, and just talking about like, you know, I know that you don't think this, because this is the other thing about teen thinking in that stage, right? They think that they can do anything and that their body can bounce back. And I'm like, I get it. It works right now. But by the end of the school year, if you keep this up, suddenly your memory is not going to work the way it used to.
So here's the thing though in teen thinking that I want your advice on, because the sleep issue is very, very real. I know in California too, they also made a law that schools can't start before a specific time.
I love that.
And I love that. I love that because my daughter, sleep is a hard thing. Like obviously teens don't produce melatonin the same time we do.
No, they
and
don't.
She is up way later than I am. Sometimes I'm not even going to bed until like 1 or 2 a.m. And it's her doing schoolwork. It's not her on a phone. It's not her like watching things. She is like doing her schoolwork. And when I talk to her about these things, she's like, well, Mom, I just don't have a choice right now. This is just how my life is right now. Completely different kid during the summer, completely like so much happier, so much lighter. And then the school year hits and she doesn't think she has a choice. What can we do?
Yeah. So
with
let's
that?
just talk about the science behind it for 1 second, because you mentioned all the contributing factors, and it's really important to recognize them. So number one, melatonin is the natural chemical we make that tells our body to wind down and go to sleep. Okay. Babies, young kids, and us, we all start churning out melatonin around 7:30, 8:30, we're ready to go to bed. Teenagers and young adults, but especially teenagers, that melatonin starts releasing later and later and later into the night, and they are legit not tired until 11, 11:30, 12, 12:30, right? So that is biology. Then you layer on top of it the amount of work they have, and the good, hardworking students who are diligent and doing the thing, and they're not on their phone, but they're on a laptop, they're on a screen, they're doing the thing that they need to do. Their brain is being stimulated. And then we haven't even mentioned the third, which is they deserve to be and need to be social creatures. And the way they engage and when they engage is after school ends and after their after school stuff is done and after their homework is done, which is in the middle of the freaking night. So all of these things ladder up to interfere with sleep, because it's not like their life starts at 10 o'clock the next morning. It doesn't.
Yeah. Right.
Right. So what do? I'll tell you what we do. We educate kids. That's what we do. We teach them what sleep does. And I'll just give you like the quick top line. Sleep controls your mood, it resets your mood. Sleep is the time you file memories. So pulling an all-nighter before a test, you will not do as well on the test as actually going to bed. That's when all the memories are filed in accessible places in your brain. Sleep is when you grow. Okay. Now your daughter's 6'1", so I mean, there's that, right?
Give that as
she'd be able like, I can let that go.
Yes, but
forget this. Taylor Swift is 5'11". I need to shrink.
Exactly. For the other 99%, that is a real motivator to get them into bed. And the fourth is sleep controls our metabolism. It changes the way we burn through energy the next day. When we do not get enough sleep, our body is cued to take all the calories that we take in the next day and store them as fat, because one day we may need it because this body is not taking good care of me. And that is where we see dramatic shifts in metabolism. When you educate kids about that, then kids become very invested in their own sleep, and they can retrain their brains to release melatonin earlier. It takes a lot of time and practice, but they can engage in wind down rituals that will help cue their brain to want to go to bed earlier.
And Joanne, I also think it's getting to something Bree said earlier, which is teaching her the skills to clock when she feels good and lighter, and when she doesn't, and figuring out ways to get sort of like micro doses of that lightness into her week. So like it's summer. She's probably outside. She's probably moving her body. She's probably with friends, whatever it is. She doesn't have hours and hours of homework. And so a conversation that sounds like, hey, I've noticed in the summers, your mood is different. You smile more, you laugh more. I love seeing this side of you. I wish we could have more of that side of you for your sake during the year. What are some small things we could do during the week that it gives you a little bit of a taste of summer throughout the year? And just you're noticing, you're not judging the pressure she feels. You're not adding to the pressure by telling her she needs to like change everything, but you are helping her with the self-reflection of saying, I feel good at this time. I don't feel so great at this time. I went through the same process with my daughter, who was like, I have to do everything I can. I have to take every class I can. I have to join every team I can. And I finally said, it's too much and you have to choose. And so how do we get to a decision point? Let's walk through, let's do a pros and cons list. Let's sit with it. Let's talk to some older kids who've been through this journey before. What was worth it? What wasn't worth it? Like older kids are often such amazing advisors because if they're just out the other side, they're not you. And they're incredibly thoughtful because they've lived it and they've now reflected on the trade-offs they made in order to make those choices.
I love that. And the self-reflection piece and engaging her in the self-reflection piece, we do that a lot. It's been like a very big process. And I think like when we coach moms to do this, and if you're listening to this right now as a listener, it's easy to think like this could be just one thing you do, but this is such a long process as a parent to get through to kids. And sometimes like conversations I had with my child at like when she was in 8th grade and she's a junior are now popping up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, you were listening. And this was like having an effect then.
Right.
So if you're listening right now, like it is a long, long process, but it's totally worth it in the end, because I think the self-reflection, it goes with everything that kids do. It goes with, their sleep. It goes with monitoring their own screen time use and how they feel when they're like looking at their devices. And it goes to like their relationships with people as well. And it's such like a lot of people, I think, fear puberty. Going through puberty with their kids. But it's such an interesting change to see kids go through it. Now with girls, I feel like I'm a little more prepared that way. But with boys, I don't really know what I'm doing here, because there are like certain like, body characteristic aspects of it where I know my son, like he would be mortified even at 11. Me bringing that up. Like, I really want my husband ideally in the perfect world to do it. But like, what can moms of boys do who are going through puberty? And we'll talk about that right after this. So talking about boys when it comes to puberty, what can moms of boys do to really help their sons through it, even if we might not be very comfortable with it ourselves?
Because we're terrified that all we're going to do is find crunchy towels and socks, and they're going to ask us about body parts that we don't have.
Okay,
so I'm speaking for somebody else.
I'm gonna reframe the question. We will get to crunchy socks and towels, but I want to reframe the question. Instead of thinking about talking to boys through this decade of puberty as only about the anatomical stuff or only about what comes out of their bodies in various forms. Think of talking about puberty as just another way of creating connection with your kid. And so you may not be able to talk to them about what it feels like to have an erection or a wet dream or anything like that. Doesn't mean you can't talk to them about that. And Cara is wonderful at talking about, even if you don't have the equipment, you can have the conversations. But my reframe is you are creating trust and connection and lines of communication with your kid. And conversations about puberty are not always about the anatomical body parts, the physiology. Conversations during this time are about friendship and loneliness and love and respect and joy and sadness and laughter, lots and lots and lots of laughter. And sometimes you don't cover any of the actual specific, quote, puberty topics, but you're just there with your kid and you're the adult who shows up, who's available when a question comes up, when there's an issue, when there's curiosity. So if we think of it instead as an opportunity to be in conversation about really anything at all during this decade of life, it feels less intimidating. So it could be about like, oh, what are you playing on Xbox right now? Because I am such an idiot when it comes to gaming, but I want to know what you're playing. Or who's on your fantasy football team this week? Or, hey, let's make dinner together because I have this new recipe and I think you're going to really like it. And then you never know what's going to come out in the midst of that conversation that's actually really valuable and important in your relationship with your kid.
I mean,
I love hearing that because I'm so afraid my son is going to become an emotionally unavailable male. Like,
okay.
And so we have those conversations a
I
lot.
wanna
How do we
go
handle
here.
these
Dig deep
fears?
to
How do
emotions.
we handle these?
I want to go
Yes.
here because we have to address the elephant in the room, which is boy silence, right?
Mhm.
So one of the things that makes you afraid that he is going to become emotionally unavailable is that there's no data here. I'm just telling you, scientist who's listening, go study this because someone needs to. As testosterone starts to surge around the tween and teen body, their volume knob turns down. And some of them go from being huge talkers to slightly less huge talkers. And some go from being 2-word answers to grunts or nothing at all.
That's
Interesting.
mine.
Okay. That was mine. It is painful. It is so terrifying because what you think is what you're seeing is a kid who has no emotional capacity. That is not what you are seeing.
Oh, thank God for
Everything
telling me
Vanessa
that.
just said, everything Vanessa just said applies to a silent boy. They want to be in conversation. They just have this hormone in their body that is telling them to be internal and to process quietly and to not communicate. Some of them, it's temperamental. Some of them, they're just observers, right? And they're not big sharers. And we gender this, and it's just how they were born. It's just their personality. So here's what I did. And I actually wrote a book called Decoding Boys about this phenomenon.
It's a great book.
I'm writing it down right now.
I will
great book.
tell you, like, this was one of the hardest things I ever managed as a parent. And I know a fair amount about the body and the brain. And this was a steep climb. I used to sit on the other side of my son's closed door. And I would say through the door, buddy, I am here. I'm just going to hang out here for about 10 minutes. I'm really interested in what's going on with you. I'd really like to have a conversation. So I'm going to shut up now, which is hard for me. If you have not noticed, I'm going to shut up now and I'll be here if you're interested in talking. And I will say and I didn't make this up, by the way, I had very smart, wise parents who were in my practice years earlier who taught me this. I learned everything I know from smart parents. It took several silent sessions before he started to open up. And now he is 19 years old. And we have this thing where when I'm ready to talk about something, I will go in his room and I will lay on his bed and I will just look up at the ceiling and he's perched somewhere else on a chair or whatever. And we do not make eye contact. I'm just there and present and I will start talking to the ceiling and he will just let it go and start talking to me. So is that his personality? Is that his maleness? I don't know where one ends and the other begins, but what I can tell you is Vanessa is 1000% right. They want to be in these conversations. We just have to find the key that unlocks the door for each of these individual kids. And for boys in general, conversations with their parents, both, but especially with their moms for whatever reason tend to get really, really quiet. And it is our job to constantly say, I'm here, I care, I'm interested, I'm not going away, not to be in their face, but to be present. And it changes everything. And they eventually emerge out the other side. And it is the best feeling ever.
I love
That's
that.
fantastic.
I love that idea
they
too,
come
just
back.
to be there.
Yeah,
They come back.
they come back. There's this fear that there's a grief and a loss. And we hear this in every keynote we give. There's a parent who raises their hand and says, I used to have this loving child who I was so close to, and I feel like I've lost him. And they do come back. So if anyone is listening who is feeling that grief, who is feeling that loss, they come back, they go through the other stage, they go through the other end of the stage, and they're so interesting and so funny. And maybe they're still quiet, but they're there with you. So don't worry that they're never going to come back to you.
Can we
I
get
think
to crunchy socks though?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, like, I do think that that's great though, because I think a lot of moms, we carry that in silence,
Mhm.
that shame that we
Mhm.
did something wrong,
Yes.
and that's why they're not talking anymore.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going
That
to
we failed them.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell anybody that. Like maybe my best friend at most, but I'm not. It's not something that we talk about when we get together for our, mom dinners and chatting
Or on
with
Instagram.
Yeah.
You're looking on Instagram and everyone else is surrounded by their children and everybody looks happy. And you're like, well, my family vacation sucked because everybody was arguing the whole time. I'm
And
the
it's-
only one,
Yeah,
right?
and
it's
my
like
son insisted that he did not want to be there, no matter what
that
I
he
did.
hated me and the whole experience. And I just
Yeah.
blew my vacation budget for the year on a miserable vacation, but it's only me.
Right.
And no, it's not only you. It happens to all of us.
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, now crunchy socks.
This
Let's
is something I have
tackle that.
not had to even think about yet, so I need to get prepared.
Okay. So here's the deal. There are things that happen with the male body that are unique to the male body. And you got two choices. You can educate yourself and learn about them and talk to your kid about them, or you can put your head in the sand and pretend they don't happen. And then when they do happen, you have a kid who is left completely flat-footed and has no idea what to do. Our most viral clips on social media are whenever we say words like penis or wet dream, because kids are starving for information about what's normal in their body, what they should expect, and how to manage it. So here's one. Wet dreams happen. They happen sometimes every night, sometimes almost never, sometimes actually never, and most of the time intermittently, and you can't predict how much and when and where and this, that, and the other. They need to know there's nothing wrong with them. Yeah. It's totally normal. It's completely expected if it happens. It's completely expected if it doesn't happen. And oh my gosh, by the way, you can take the sheets off your bed and you can clean them and it's totally manageable, right? Like there's no shame.
Yeah.
It just is what it is.
It is what it is. That is interesting to hear, because like, what age do you think we should start talking about like wet dreams? Like, how do you introduce this?
I mean, wet dreams don't happen at the beginning of male puberty because the testosterone has to be circulating in the body for a couple of years to get the testicles up and running as real factories so that sperm production happens and ejaculation happens. So it's not like breast buds, which are a first sign and everyone can see them. It's further along in the process. And obviously every kid is going to enter puberty at a different age.
time.
And we should have said that there's averages, but there are early bloomers and late bloomers and people right in the middle.
Yeah.
And so I actually find you can do it. I mean, you have an 11-year-old, Joanne?
Yes.
Okay. So I wouldn't go like straight for wet dreams because there's some like foundational knowledge. Like make sure your kid knows the word penis and not just the word, D-I-C-K
he knows
right.
all of it.
Yes.
I used to be a 5th grade teacher, and I had to teach human growth and development.
Yeah. So you're
I'm
for
pretty comfortable.
boys. For boys.
For
so
boys. Yeah, they had you do the boy class. That was funny.
So
Interesting there.
he's in great hands. And the way you want to frame it, and this is, I think, a great way with any of the tricky topics, not just wet dreams, but porn, for example, or even sex, which is, hey, have you ever heard the phrase wet dreams? I know it's kind of a funny phrase. Have you ever heard that before? And they'll often say like, oh, yes. And he said, do you know what it means? Oh, yes. And you say, well, how would you describe it? I have no idea. So like they feel like they're supposed to know everything, but they don't actually, like they've heard it. It's in the water. Like 69, my kid, my 11-year-old, this is now several years ago, used the phrase 69 as the punchline to every joke. Joanne, I'm sure you're hearing this. Yes.
My kids are doing that too. And I'm like, guys, you don't know what that means. Do you know what that means? And I told them, and they're like, what?
Yes.
They're like, it's just a funny number, Mom. It's on TikTok. Right. They don't even have TikTok. And they're like, it's on TikTok.
Right. So Joanne, exactly what you did. You say, hey, I'm not sure you know what that phrase means, because if you did, I'm not sure you'd want to use it. Do you know what it means? No.
Is it Princess Bride? I don't think that means what you think it means.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
I have the funniest story for something like that. My son's friends, they all went to a movie. Like the moms, we got together, they took him to a movie, and then we all met up at like a pizza place afterwards. And they were like talking at the table, and one of his friends was like, oh yeah, like McGriddle. And I'm like, that doesn't, I don't think that means what you think it means. And I look at on a Google, I'm like, I'm going to Google that for you right now. And I'm like, nope. And I show the other mom, and like, they're like looking at us. They're like, what does it mean? Like these two 11-year-old boys, what does it mean? And I come and I show my son, and he reads off the screen, and he's like, oh no.
Okay. Can I ask what that means? Cause now I feel like I'm out of the loop.
So
or
like,
can you not talk about it?
It's a sex act, and think of like syrup being like poured over, and like, So, but it's in a public place, and so these boys are learning at it in a public place, and you could actually see their expressions when they find out what exactly it means. This phrase that they have been using casually to everyone, and it was such an enlightening experience, because like when kids realize it, they're like, hold on.
Okay. What I love about that story is you did not shame them at all.
No.
Like, right? You're like, vocabulary check.
Yes.
And it's such a great way into the conversation, because what you have showed, not just your child, but every other child who, by the way, given the fact that you were a 5th grade teacher who taught health education, you were going to be this person anyways. All of those kids are going to come to you and sit around your kitchen table forever and ask you all the questions. Why? Because you just displayed that I'm totally fine with conversation so long as you understand what the heck you're saying.
Right? Yeah. It's so interesting though, like when you're in groups of people, because one girl wanted to know what it was, and I was going to tell her, but her mom was right there, and she's like, no, I don't want you to know that information.
And that's important, Joanne, because I will always say to a parent, hey, I'm super comfortable talking about stuff in my house, but I know that my house is different from other people's houses. What do I have permission to talk about, and what would you prefer I send them to you to ask about? Because it's not our job. I mean, it is actually all of our jobs to educate people, but it's not our jobs to educate our children's friends. Nobody's signing up for that.
Although
and so,
you can't
getting
always,
permission.
But you can't always do it. And so there's another way through if it's coming up in the moment. And I've seen you do this, Vanessa, and you do it beautifully, which is to say, I'd really love to explain that. I don't know if your parents are going to be cool with that. So I think you should ask them. And then frankly, you can backdoor and say to that parent, listen, just so you know, this came up. I didn't answer the question. I told them they should talk to you, because you don't, especially as kids get older, you don't always know the parents. You don't always have those precursor conversations. Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And they come home and they're like, Mrs. Bennett taught me what 69
Be awful. And you're like, that's not how it went down, I swear.
It's interesting because the dynamic changes as they get older. Because like 11, 12-year-olds, they would totally go to their parents for that. But the teen relationship with parents gets so tricky.
Right.
Where a lot of teens, they don't feel comfortable going to their own parents. And it just becomes such a tricky situation as an adult in like one of my daughter's friends' lives. I want to explain these things to her, and yet I feel like I need to keep my mouth shut because I know this particular parent would not enjoy that.
Right.
And so it's almost like I have to educate my daughter so well that if it comes up in conversation with her and the friend, I'm not responsible for it.
Yeah. I mean, like I was listening to one of your podcast episodes recently about like talking about sex with your kids. And it was like, it's not like if we don't tell them, they're not going to know. They're going to find it. And it's probably going to
find misinformation that they're going to go to TikTok.
Exactly.
And it's probably going to be not what you wanted them to know. Like it's either going to be completely wrong or they're just going to flat out end up like even like watching something that they're not supposed to be watching. So like, you could try to stick your head in the sand, but it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
No.
Well, I could talk to you both all day.
I know.
All day
We need to do
long
another
because
episode.
We
need to do another episode.
Fascinating.
We'll come back anytime.
I love it. Love it.
But we love to end on a positive and exciting note. So what is coming up for you that you're really excited about?
We have the same thing coming up the week that this episode is airing.
Ooh.
We are moving our children into college. I'm not going to make that Vanessa's thing, but
I was like, what do we both have?
What do we have? What do we have? Yes. Our seconds are going to college.
And we're going to try to get them on our podcast, actually, to talk about being the silent
It'll
second.
sound like this.
You could hear a pin drop. And then on the work front, what we have coming up is we have soft launched a membership, which has a searchable library of all the puberty content we have ever created, podcasts, newsletters, videos, and it also has an AI bot where you can ask it any questions, and it's trained on all the books we've ever written, all the podcast transcripts, all the newsletters. So you can literally say, how do I talk to my son about wet dreams? And it will provide you an answer, scripting, further reading, further listening, more resources to have the conversation.
The answer usually starts with something like, wow, that's a rough one, but here we go.
Okay.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today.